Topic today is one that everyone has experienced on some level: grief. So, there are many different kinds of grief. As children, we usually experience it first with the loss of a pet or the loss of a grandparent. This is our first introduction. But as we get older, we lose our parents, we lose our spouses, friends, and sometimes children. Grief can feel insurmountable, overwhelming. But as one wise person told me after my mother died, grief is a place that we travel through. It is not a place to stay. So today, my guest is a friend, a writer, a college professor, a mother, a wife, and a daughter who lost both of her parents within 11 months of one another. Christa Gala. Christa, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much for having me today to talk about this topic.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to cover caregiving in another program, but I know that you were also a caregiver. And I know personally, because I was a caregiver for my mom, that this does not lend itself to being able to grieve because you are so busy. You have so many logistics. So, talk a little bit about the circumstances around your parents' illness and their eventual death, if you will.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. My mother was the one who lived here. My dad was in another state, but she was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, which is a really brutal cancer. And she had to have a feeding tube, had never been sick a day in her life. And so she had 2.5 years, and some of that time was quite good. She'd go up and down, but we dealt with a host of things. Her needing oxygen, multiple surgeries. We had a fall. Um, like I said, the feeding tube, and so it really is to the point where you're grieving because you're losing them. I remember thinking that only 4 months had passed since her diagnosis, and I remember driving in my car and just thinking, how did we get here? Because my mother looked like a completely different person. I mean, she went from about 120 pounds to 74 pounds, and it was heartbreaking, but you still had to try to keep it together, and you had to get her to all the appointments, and we were fierce about, we're going to beat this, and we're going to do this. And so it was a lot of pulling together. But I will say towards the end, there's a very brutal part of caregiving or watching someone you love who's dying, actively dying. And my mother said that. She said, Chrissy, I'm dying. And they start to suffer so much that then you almost don't know what to pray for. At that point you start to say, this is too much for them. It's the most selfless prayer I ever prayed, which just, was that she would go ahead and pass, because that's a special kind of, suffering. I think is the,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I remember somebody, and several people on the show have described the death of a loved one as you're losing them a little bit every single day. Did you feel that way?
Yes.
That you were it's called anticipatory grief, is what somebody described it as.
Yes, I definitely felt that every day. I mean, my mom and I were like a candy cane, like she was the red and I was the white. And I don't know if you can have a parent as a soulmate, but she was the best person I ever knew, and we did all kinds of things together. We read books together and would see, we liked the nerdy kind of indie movies. We would always watch those and discuss those together. We would go to lunch. And slowly she just stopped being able to do those things. It was just too much. We would have to take the oxygen or take the feeding tube pole. We would always go shopping, and she stopped being able to do that. So then we would start to gather at her house and I would show her what I bought and give her a little fashion show. But, she couldn't really eat anymore. So you do start to lose them bit by bit. And, then you cry in the car on your way home, and you cry when you get up in the morning, and yeah.
I remember crying in the car when my mom was dying at intersections. and then people looking over at me going, what in the world is going on with that woman? And sometimes, unfortunately, with my girls in the car because I just couldn't keep it together.
Yeah.
Sometimes also at the grocery store. And I remember thinking, why is everybody so happy here at the grocery store? Don't
Yeah.
they know my mother's dying? You know, these like irrational thoughts.
Yes.
What year did she pass, Krista?
She passed in 2015, so about 9 years ago, and she passed the day before Thanksgiving. So we're
Which
right at that 9 year.
which is yeah, and anytime you have a milestone holiday that's connected to a death, I think it's really even harder because you remember that every year. So then your dad was out of state. Where was your dad?
So he was in Southeast Missouri, which is where both of my parents were from, and my parents were divorced. They had divorced after a very long marriage, so that was kind of unusual in and of itself. So he had a wife, and he had congestive heart failure, and just really, really struggled with that. And we lost him less than a year after my mom. So burying both parents, by the time we lost him, I was just so numb. And he died just a couple of days after my birthday in 2016. And, honestly, I think for 2 years or a little more than 2 years, it was just, I felt so numb. It it was hard. There were just times when I just thought, I'm never going to feel joy again. Like I was going through the motions and doing what I needed to do, but I can totally relate to the crying in the car so that you weren't crying in front of your kids or trying not to lose it. Oh, in the grocery store. I mean, I was going to Sunday school at the time at this church that I really loved, and I would just start crying in Sunday school. I mean, I just was like,
Well, in a way, I mean, I feel like as adults, even though we don't recognize it, our parents are the anchor to the world. They are the anchor to the unconditional love. And it it hits you in a way that you don't expect it because we're taught, oh, we're adults. We should buck up. We should just, we should be okay. But that's not reality, right? I mean, that's not how it is. We still suffer like anybody else. And
right.
yet we're expected to just move on.
I mean, we're still the same people or the same kids, children inside that we always were. And so, no matter how old you are, to be an orphan in the world is is a sobering thought because you can't call them again to ask them. They're not going to give you that encouragement or say, I'm so proud of you. Those were things that my both of my parents used to do. They were my biggest cheerleaders, and nobody loves you like that. It sucks, but nobody loves you like that. So that was devastating.
Yeah, I
Um,
always tell my kids, you won't know how much I love you until you have your own children. And then you're going to go, that's how much my mother loves me, how much I love this child.
isn't that
Um,
true?
it really is. It really, I'm not that I'm in a rush, but so what did you do? What kind of self-care did you do to try to process all this?
That's a great question. I mean, when it first happened, I really thought I had a very sort of high pressure job that expected me to be back at work very quickly. And I really kind of thought, I got this. Um, I thought she was very sick. She didn't want her to suffer anymore. I got this. And about a month in, I just completely fell apart. And so what I started to do was to go to grief counseling. I went every week, and then I went every other week or every month for 2 years. Um, and then with my job, I just pretty much had an extreme burnout. I just said, I can't do this anymore. I mean, I remember being so tired, um, with with a child and having lost, my mother and just working and teaching, that I remember going to buy my son's soccer cleats and he was with me, and I had the strongest urge to just lay down in the floor of a cabin sports to just lay in the aisle and go to sleep. Like that's just how tired I was. So, I learned through some counseling to be protective of myself, my mental health, my time. And so I started saying, no, I can't do this. I can't do that. I started not taking on so much responsibility. And I started to say to myself, you've really got to find the things right now that make you really happy. And maybe that's a hot bath. Maybe it's a massage. Maybe it's a nap or drink, with a drink, glass of wine with a good friend. So my therapist said to me, when you get that way and you're feeling that grief has you, in its grip, think, what do I need right now? What is something I can do right now? Maybe it's a piece of pizza. Maybe it's, and so being just patient and knowing I had so many responsibilities that I had to do, but that I had to take time to do the little comforts that would get me through really helped. And I still use that to this day, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's some great advice. Like you said, we could probably use it every
Mhm.
day, not just, when it comes to grief. What advice would you give other women? Because that's really what this podcast is about, which is learning from other people's paths and journeys, about how they handled something that might give somebody else some insight.
Um, in terms of if they were going through grief themselves or just helping someone through grief. Um, one thing I would say is if you're dealing with someone, a loved one who's lost someone or dealing with grief, invite them to talk about that person. Ask questions about that person. What were they like? What was one of your favorite memories? What was something they always did, that made you laugh or that frustrated you? I think sharing memories is great, and people are scared to talk about it. Um, for someone who's going through grief themselves, just you've like you said in the introduction, you've got to go through this. You cannot just pick it up and bury it under the rug and have one day for the funeral and one day to recover. This is not a 2-day weekend event. This is forever. It is. If it's someone you are so close to, for me, losing my mom was much more visceral than losing my father. We just had a closer relationship. And, I just really thought it wasn't until about 2.5 years that I thought, wow, I might really survive this. Like, not just sludge through it. I might really be able to come out of this better. And I don't know if I've come out better. I'm tougher. I'm definitely tougher.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What, if anything, tangible did you learn?
Oh, I just learned that I don't have, time to waste being scared to do the things I want to do. So now I ask for everything. I ask for everything. I go do everything. I say what I want to say. And, you know, I I am. I mean, I don't know if I'm stronger, but I'm just like, well, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm going to do. So I'm not, I think before my parents died, I was in the role of child and sort of people pleaser, young girl. Like, if I work really hard, people will notice me. And if I'm really nice, good things will happen. And now, I saw how fast my mother deteriorated. And yet she showed me how fierce she was in her own. She stayed in her home till the very end. If her feeding tube clogged up, she had, um, a wrench that she would use to unclog it. She showed me how fierce she was, even at 74 pounds. And so that's given me the toughness and the courage now to just say, this is my life. I don't know how long I have in it. So I'm going after what I want. And I think that's what I've gained from it. So I guess you could say stronger and better might be subjective, but tougher for sure.
Those are great points. I know my mom, I used to say to my mom sometimes, Mom, I cannot do this when I was caregiving. And she would say to me, Yes, you can, because you're my daughter.
Hmm.
And, it's kind of there's the meme of, straighten your crown and remember who your mom is.
Yep.
And I also think that we're in kind of a protective bubble, even as adults, when our parents are still alive, because our decisions are still kind of to please them in a
Right,
way.
right.
And then when I lost my mom, I don't know how old you were. I was 46, which was pretty young to
I
lose
was
a parent.
44.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
So
the same
around the
age.
same age. I went, oh wow, like now I have to make decisions on my own.
I know.
There's nobody to call. I joked to my husband, you're going to be the first call. He said, oh, is there somebody else that could step in? Maybe a friend or a cousin? And I have now since developed many first calls, a great tribe of women around me. But thank you so much, Christa, for sharing this with us. And, to the point of sharing about the person, just let's wrap up with a little bit about your favorite memories of your mom.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. My mom was just so, funny and light and, was always making jokes and was always so kind. I don't think I ever heard her say a bad thing about a person. She was, which for me, at that, I was like, gosh, you don't ever, or I know what, if she was going to say, if she had she'd call it an ugly. She would
Okay,
say,
that's fair.
girls, I'm gonna have ugly, which meant I'm gonna say something not nice about someone.
Right.
And we would laugh, and she would say, you know,
The
um,
thing, which probably wasn't
whatever it was.
nearly as bad as what people say today.
No,
Anyway,
it wasn't bad at all. It would be something like, I don't know why she wears that because it's so unflattering on her.
right.
She would look so much thinner in something longer, or, something
Right,
like that.
right.
So, that's just one of many stories. I was with her one time at the grocery store and helping her get groceries, and she had her cane and we had her air canisters and everything, and I was help walking with her, and there was a minivan with a man in it, and he drove by once and then he drove by again and he waved, and my mom, she just goes, "There's your boyfriend." I
Oh
mean,
gosh.
just she was always just quippy and fun,
Fun.
and then intelligent. We would talk about books and movies, and
Well,
she was amazing.
sounds like she was a wonderful person. And what was her name?
Naomi,
Naomi. Okay.
Naomi Williams. Yeah,
Well, thank you for sharing Naomi with us. And thank you for sharing your feelings about this topic because it's one that we're all going to face if we haven't faced it yet. So,
absolutely. And I know, Amanda, that you lost your mother too, and watching you go through that, um, was inspiring, gave me courage when I went through it just a few years later. So,
well, thank you.
I think you're right. We all have to surround ourselves with people who love us, care about us, because it's scary that now we're the ones. You're like, wait, I'm at the top of the food
I'm the
chain. Like,
adult. Oh, gosh.
we're the ones that make the decisions now.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Who put that on me? I
Yes.
gotcha. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. And we will be right back with more on this topic.